All right. How is everybody doing? Hello out there. Welcome. Welcome to our webinar, Geodesign Applied in Practice. My name is Dan Meehan. I'm the program manager for the online master's degree program at Penn State, and I'm here with Lisa DuRussel, who's an assistant professor, practitioner in residence, also at Penn State.
Hello.
And my co-host today, thanks Lisa.
You're welcome, Dan.
We'll keep our videos off for now, but get through some housekeeping issues real quick. So our goal here is to get started with, and inform you about geodesign. Inform and educate you, let you know what it is, how it's being used, and how you can learn more about it via our online master's degree program. We've closed the chat down, but we can see chat. So if you do have questions, leave them in the group chat. We'll get to them at the end. Also, leave your email if you'd like to be added to our list of folks to get on our mailing list. And a quick reminder that we do have a online, our next online course, Geodesign 511, which introduces everybody to the framework, is starting in May. So just keep that on your radar. Okay, we're for just a few more people to join in here. Thank you. So, happy Earth Day as well. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure there's a lot of webinars today, but appreciate you joining ours. I thought it'd be good to start off with an Ian McCard quote. Hopefully I'll read here. But just, how important it is, especially with what's happening right now, biodiversity, right? And how many solutions nature can provide for us. So, all right, let's see. Managing this stuff. Okay, so again, we're here to talk to you about our program. We have an online master's degree, entirely online, geared toward working professionals. There's no GRE required. You can get your certificate in as little as a year, and your master's in as little as 3 years. So we'll get in a little more detail about it at the end. You can also find us in various online formats and social medias, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, our website, and our email there. So if and when you need to contact us, there we are. And I will show these at the end, so you can get them again. And then, so yeah, here we go. Myself and Lisa are going to give you a little bit about Geodesign, our program, and kind of what it's all about. So, as I mentioned, Lisa is a professor in residence. She has a ton of experience, as you can read here. And I've been working with the master's degree program for 8 years now, doing mostly marketing, recruitment, and also helping instructors helping them build the geospatial GIS models they need to help run their courses. So today, here's what we are going to learn. We're going to talk about how geodesign relates to you, how it's being used in practice, who is using it in practice, and why that's important. We're going to talk about how it's evolving with the digital age, how it's guided by input from all different stakeholders, and it's an open and transparent process that allows for all voices to be heard. We're going to show you how it was applied with a case study that Lisa and I worked on here at Penn State with some local issue here in State College. And then we'll get into a little more detail about our program and what's going on, kind of the process and the program itself. So let's start by defining it, right? Start with the master, Carl Stein. He's the one who wrote the book on geodesign. He's formulated this process over 50 years in practice, so it's been vetted by those professionals. Carl says it's an application of the design related processes intended to change the geographical study areas in which they're applied and realized. So that's the academic, the version. I like to say it's using GIS and other predictive models to help make decisions about how you design landscapes. It's about how you solve issues that involve complex systems and many stakeholders, and kind of the more difficult the problem, the more suited the the framework is to help you out. And then, and now I'm actually going to throw it over to Lisa now, and she can talk about what she thinks geodesign is, and then I'll let her take it from there. So,
Hey everyone, Lisa DuRussel here. Dan, thank you so much for inviting me to talk about my experience with geodesign and as a landscape architect, how I see it used in practice and how I've used it in my own practice. So when Dan asked me how I would define geodesign, it took me a minute to think about it because for those of you that don't know me, I've only been really involved in the geodesign realm for about the last year, really getting introduced to what it is now here at Penn State through the geodesign program we have here. And so if I had to summarize it, I would say that to me, geodesign is both a thought process and a representation strategy that landscape architects can add to their toolbox to forecast trends, very important, and to synthesize both complex physical and social data, ultimately finding consensus in decision making. So for us, given the current state of the world, I think that geodesign is actually even more important because it's important for us to see how important transparency is in the decisions that we make, whether it is budget allocation for our projects, justification of the data that we use, clarity and simple conversation, but most importantly, understanding decisions and being able to negotiate and arrive at consensus when we are making decisions. So if we can go to the next slide. Ultimately, when I was introduced to geodesign, you know, I immediately said, it's just GIS, isn't it? Well, silly me, not anymore. This is generally the traditional process, I think, when I think of geodesign, thinking that we have a few major segments in GIS technologies. The first one is really data. So, you know, we think about maps, we think about finding this secure, physical, complex data. Initially, GIS was really about developing these geodatabases, similar to what Esri has done for us, how people are now out there really creating their own data and then allowing us to utilize that in our practices. We then took that data and really started to think about how we analyze that data. So it kind of migrates to what I call the second segment, where we start to process features. We look at the data and we analyze and synthesize it based on the projects that we're doing. This helps us inform design. So that's really pretty much like the most recent. So, you know, traditionally, this makes sense. You have data, you analyze it, you use it to inform your design. And more recently, you know, we are starting to think about this fourth wave of design, really starting to integrate people into our design process. And so ultimately, what we're doing is we are taking geospatial data, exploring the impacts of those design ideas. And ultimately for me, you know, and many others in the geodesign processes, this is really what the heart of geodesign is. Taking all of these things and really kind of like putting them into a bowl and then starting to design with that. So next slide, Dan. If I had to think about it, you know, really GIS and geodesign is really working at multiple scales. So we have our global scale and our site scale. When we think about the global scale, ultimately we're thinking about people who are really functioning in the geographic sciences, people who are focused on information technologies. At the site scale, this is where we get our design professionals, people providing those demand-based offensive strategies and really trying to integrate the people of the place. So when I think about, you know, what people excel in, you know, obviously we have experts in the global scale, we have experts in the site scale. But where I think geodesign becomes important is that we all get to collaborate and negotiate based on the information that is out there. So ultimately, this process, the process of geodesign, specifically marries science and in particular geospatial data. And as Kellyanne Foster, the director of this program, says, that this is really an iterative collaboration-based strategy to approach land use design, to approach planning challenges in a really unique way. Ultimately, those decisions are win-win, and where we can use the science to support the design and the design to support the value of the people, I think that, ultimately this is where we want to be. We already see geodesign used in practice. So next slide, Dan. Currently, geodesign is being used in architecture and engineering. This is an example of Jacobs APG, where they actually developed an implementation strategy that focused on alleviating existing funding bottlenecks and streamlining redundant systems across 9 different agencies, federal agencies. So ultimately, they were able to use geodesign as a way to comprehensively communicate, in this scenario, an evacuation plan and to discuss a recovery plan to minimize operational downtime. Next slide. We also see this used in government and municipal strategies. So this is an example from the Cape Cod Commission and Halcyon Levine, where they were working on a regional policy plan. The plan identified critical resources and management needs, and it helped to provide a growth policy for the region. Next slide, Dan. We also see this being used in community planning. This is a project done by a design workshop where the project team incorporated public input, synthesizing many measurable objectives, working across a range of scales to transform an old industrial rail corridor into a celebrated greenway. Next slide. We also see this being used in urban design and even in landscape architecture, utilizing some of the tools that exist out there. Ultimately, what we can do is we can actually use the tools to show in real time visualizations such as what's being shown on your screen as a means to show different scenarios. And so imagine being in a community board meeting where somebody is asking you, the designer, well, did you think about making the streetscape this way? Did you think about putting another level on that building? Did you think about narrowing your street to 12 feet instead of, each lane as being 14? And amazingly, what we can do is we can actually utilize these tools to say, yeah, we've thought of this from the outset, and now here's what this might look like. Again, starting to try and really get real-time decision-making rather than having to take all of the comments back to our design studio and work with it then, and then going back a month later to that same community board and saying, yeah, we've thought about your questions and we've thought about your comments, and here's what we've come up with. And so I think that especially, gosh, when I've been in community board meetings, this would have been like paramount to actually getting comments understood and immediately of course, with a little bit of work at the beginning in the studio, but to really just start to make some decisions and really start to show community members that we're really thinking about this. Next slide, Dan. We're seeing this work in general planning. PlaceWorks is a company on the West Coast that is incorporating geodesign into general planning. As they say here, GIS is not just mapping anymore. This is a place where we can collaborate and build consensus using these interactive web-based GIS tools and technologies. Next slide. Dan will speak more about this at the end of this presentation, but we're already using geodesign in education. A couple of the examples here show things, analysis and design in terms of planning for sea level rise, looking at locations where new river walks can be placed. And also, interestingly, right in the center of this slide, looking at different koala habitats and what landscape might be suitable for things like that. Next slide. We also use this in research. So I was able to be a part of the International Geodesign Collaboration this year, where we actually took the project Mustard Gap to Valley Lens, which I'll share with you as our case study for this webinar. And we were able to actually look at it over the course of the next 30 years as it relates to sustainable development goals as established by the UN. So this is something that has become really important because, again, we're kind of looking at this from a variety of scales, not just what we're doing from a global standpoint, but also how our site is really starting to impact those sustainable development goals, either meeting, not meeting, or exceeding those things. And so this is something that's actually happening now in the world. Next slide. So in terms of practice, the one thing that I think is really important, as I mentioned, I'm pretty new to this idea of geodesign. And about a year ago, I was asked to deliver a course here at Penn State that was a course that was geared towards landscape architects, but also geared towards students in engineering, in architecture, in graphic design, in a number of other more kind of allied disciplines. And ultimately, this project was pretty successful in terms of, number one, taking a look at a piece of property that Penn State currently owns, but then also thinking about a new pilot process for community planning on how that project kind of started to move forward. And so in a way, we were able to use these analog tools that landscape architects typically use, charrette, community engagement, and pairing them with geodesign, again, to prioritize these community desires. So this project is one that we call Mustard Gap to Valley Lens. So if you are in the State College region, you may have heard about this. We've also been able to share this project at the Geodesign Summit in Redlands, California this year. We were at GeoCities in Vancouver. We have talked about this at National Areas Preservation in Pittsburgh. We've been all over. So we've been excited to share the work that we've been able to do with this project. So this project is in State College. So if you guys aren't familiar with State College is, it is in central Pennsylvania. It is in the Ridge Valley region of central Pennsylvania, so right at the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. About 2 hours from Pittsburgh, 4 hours from New York City. The context of the site is really unique. The site itself is situated on about 355 acres in State College. It's university owned. What's unique about it is that it's currently used as traditional agriculture. So current land use is soybeans and corn. It is leased to a farmer who leases it on a year-by-year basis. It also has a greenway that extends from downtown State College all the way to Rothrock State Forest, which you see here at the kind of lower portion of this map here. So the Mustard Gap Greenway already goes through the center of this farming site. It is also very close to the aquifer where State College gets the majority of their drinking water. So you can see here on the map, Slab Cabin Run basically bisects our site. The site itself is relatively contentious. There is a new luxury student housing project that is being built on the north end of the site. And obviously with the proximity to water recharge, what happens within this area is extremely important. It is outside of State College's public or urban growth boundary. And so because of that, there has been a little bit of public outcry, which means this is why we're doing this project here at the university. We're trying to get the university to embrace this new way of planning to really start to think about how we make decisions now and how those decisions are transparent. So for us, we really got a charge, from the president of the university to say, hey, we have this 355 acre site. let's create a vision for this area, not only to protect the local water supply, but to also allow people in the area to think about different animal species, to create a place where people can enjoy nature and learn about the environment. So for me as a landscape architect coming into this project, I said, this is really about kind of a really kind of linear process where we think about analysis, where we think about community engagement, where we think about decision maker engagement, and then ultimately think about the feasibility of our ideas. So next slide, Dan. And that is represented here on this slide. Overall, the process was basically 2 courses, and then faculty and staff came together to really think about the feasibility of what had come out of our coursework. And just this year, a design RFP was issued to hopefully get some of this stuff in the ground. So MG2V phase 1 began in fall 2018, where we basically started to just really gather data. It was a deep dive into the existing site conditions to look at history, context, and current use. In phase 2, which was spring of 2019, we started to think about how we started to engage the community. We used interviews with key informants, held a series of open houses, used public online surveys, listening sessions, public presentation, and most importantly, this geodesign workshop, which I'll go into a little bit more detail. What we found was that there were a number of themes that we wanted to try and apply to sites. So given these existing conditions, there were a number of design ideas that started to emerge. And so what had happened is we said, okay, well, let's take these ideas back to the public and back to our key informants and say, all right, let's run this geodesign workshop. How do we know what we want to do with the site? Where do we want it? What are your values and what are your priorities? So we really use this geodesign workshop to start to refine issues and start that negotiation. Next slide. What we asked the students and what we asked really any user who was interested in this project is we asked them to start to create diagrams on the site to say, all right, if you have an idea, draw it. We had a program called GeoForage, and we said, find a place for your idea. So people started going online and drawing in things like enhanced bike trails, putting in things like, research stations, a place for amenities for more people to use. They started to draw in things like different kinds of landscapes that would enhance biodiversity. So ultimately, based on what we learned in our both community meetings and what the community then was able to digitize here, students really gleaned information from that meetings and started to document these things. Ultimately, in our geodesign workshop, what we were able to do is we were able to synthesize and compare some of those ideas. So here on this slide is basically the geodesign process. So we identified different systems that were important. We started to evaluate suitability through mapping. And then we went through a series of design cycles that were then shared in that geodesign process. Ultimately, next slide, we were able to take everyone at that geodesign workshop, separate them into different what we called change teams, residents, people who are interested in economic development, university affiliates, local governments. And we were able to actually allow them to rate and weight their priorities. So obviously, the farming community has different priorities than, say, economic developers. And so this is where it got really exciting because we were able to allow them to select the different diagrams. And in real time, in a browser-based scenario, we were able to really rate and weight and overlap their different strategies for what should happen on the site and see where we could find points of contention and points of negotiation. So ultimately, what we did is we took all of this information back to the studio and the students started to create final design ideas. 4 ideas really rose to the top: habitat and biodiversity, water resource and protection, agricultural heritage, and passive recreation. Because we knew that the university leadership was going to be making decisions regarding budgets and how we move forward with this, we actually ran the geodesign workshop again. So we digitized the work that the students had done, and we brought that back to university VPs. So we met individually with university VPs of finance and business, of local government and community relations, of facilities and planning, and of the president himself, to actually start to think about what ideas they preferred, to see what the ideal scenario is from their point of view. Next slide. We were able to pull some of the kind of tools from the geodesign toolbox to start to look at values assessment. So we knew that the president had said to us from the start that enhancing biodiversity, protecting water, enjoying nature, learning about the land, accessing the land were all very important. But as designers, we were interested in also understanding economic, social, and environmental benefits. So we actually fed all of this information and all these values back into a program called GeoPlanner, which cranked out some design budget and costs. So every line that we drew on our plan was related back to the design timeline. It was related back to the design budget. And it really started to allow us to think about the decisions being made in real time. Next slide. Ultimately, what we did is we started to compare those decision maker ideas against each other to see where there was agreement and to see where values were met. And ultimately, there was a final design idea that should it be implemented, we could actually refer back to this very transparent process. So you can see here at the top of this spreadsheet, there were about 7 different strategies that had consensus among the community, that had consensus among the university decision makers, and actually met university values. And so ultimately, these are the consensus ideas that we are hoping that are implemented as part of this next stage in design. So ultimately, for me in landscape architecture practice, just using geodesign as a way to advance community outreach strategies, I think is extremely key for what we're doing, especially in the age of COVID-19 and thinking about how we can start to do things remotely. Geodesign Hub was hugely important for this project as a way to quickly synthesize ideas, to review those ideas in a very transparent, synchronous, browser-based way, but then to also, start to think about those impacts and to allow our stakeholders to see those impacts in an immediate way. Again, thinking back to all these community board meetings that I was in back in New York City, having people participate in this very transparent process could have helped move forward processes so much and projects so much in that time. Next slide, Dan. I see geodesign being used in landscape architecture practice all over the place at a variety of scales. Sasaki in Boston completed a project called Sea Change Boston, which there are a couple of snippets here, which was a browser-based climate change mapping, interactive mapping program where you could actually put in your address and see a flooding scenario up until 2100 to start to look at the homes, the economy, the energy, and all of the transportation that was being impacted. So it allowed the data to become really real. This is an example, I think, of kind of taking that hard data, that physical data that we have, and really utilizing it in a way that is very key for people all over, say, the city of Boston, any homeowner, to see how climate change might impact their home. Next slide. Something that I think is really important for landscape architecture practice in the future is the idea of how we map social values. How do we start to map feelings? And how do we, kind of merge that with this hard physical data? SWA is already doing this as part of their Excel Innovation Lab. Anya and Emily at SWA had the great, I got to work with them last year with Landscape Architecture Foundation. And I was always just like extremely surprised and like, you know, elated with all of the work that they were doing. So a project that they had funded was a project called the Urban Sensorial Mapping Project. And really, you know, obviously as designers, gathering and understanding data has always been a hallmark of what we do. But the way that SWA did it was that they actually started to think about that physical data and now started to think about the senses, using social data, personal health data, real-time data tracking, learning and experiential data to now start to think about how our cities can change. So here we see an example, there's a map of Houston here and a map of LA here. You know, what if in Houston we could take all of the vacant land, which is represented as white here, and start populating that with spontaneous urban plants? On the right, what if we could take the highways and expressways of LA and start to utilize those in a different way to try and think about autonomous vehicles in our landscapes and think about how that might start to quiet down the city? And so this was a really, really cool project, again, that started to think about those urban senses. Next slide. Moving down scales, CMJ, also in California, has started to think about how we use the data to inform design from a climate positive perspective. So if we know our project has a specific project carbon footprint, how can we think about design and the use of the materials and plant materials that we are using in order to create something that is more kind of climate positive? How can we think about the materials that we use and the plants that we use in order to sequester carbon rather than to emit it? Ultimately, next slide, how I think, you know, we use geodesign in the future is really how we think about future practice and how we think about kind of forecasting what happens. I was listening to NPR just the other day, and I heard a quote from Dr. Anthony Fauci, who hopefully you guys all know pretty well. And he said, models don't predict the future. They help us prepare for the future. And this really resonated with me, you know, especially as we think about what is happening in the age of the pandemic that we're living through. Brian Farron, who is the COO of Applied Minds and a former president of R&D at Walt Disney Imagineering, had said, if we can actually see things happening with our own eyes before they happen in the future and appreciate the consequences of those actions, we just might be able to act and change the present. So, you know, why do we care about this? You know, ultimately, now more than ever is the time for us to act quickly. You know, again, I mentioned again, as we start thinking about budgets tightening, as we think about the importance of the transparency of design and understanding, you know, the importance of what we do today and how that impacts the future. You know, for me, what geodesign does is it really enables us to backcast. You know, we can forecast changes into the future to inform those decisions that we're making today. So again, if we can start to incorporate more transparent processes, making quicker decisions that are rooted in the data, thinking about community input and our changing economy, I think that geodesign is something that allows us to do that. You can see here, this screen capture was taken from the COVID-19 dashboard at Johns Hopkins University. And this is the data that, you know, Esri and others have really started to gather. And now we need to take this and say, all right, what do we do? And so I'm going to pass it back over to Dan to describe how geodesign, how we can get this expertise in geodesign.
Excellent. Thank you, Lisa. That was great. Appreciate your perspective on all this. It's always good to hear from a practitioner. So yeah, we'll start to wrap this up. I'm going to talk about our program, right? That's why we're here to kind of hopefully, show you what we think geodesign is, how it's being used properly, and now how can you gain more expertise. We're at a critical juncture, right? We're all experiencing pressures and problems, and online learning is no longer a novelty thing. So we've been doing this program for 5 years, so we're already in there. We've been in this space for a while, and so we'd love to show you more about what we can do. I have some quotes here on the right, just from some of our students, just to show you some diversity from engineering, from being recruited from engineering firms, working as a community planner with military installations and real estate investment. So geodesign, I think one thing we want to get through is it's a framework, it's a process that can really be applied to a myriad of issues. And so a reminder, again, we're online, certificate in 1 year, master's is in as little as 3 years. And just a little about the timeline on the bottom, you can finish your degree in 3 years. So in year 1, essentially, you learn all about the framework. In the year 2, you apply the framework. We have studio courses, one with a regional focus and the other with an urban focus, which I'm going to elaborate on here in a minute. And then finally, a capstone project, a project that you bring to the table. We pair you with an advisor, and then you go through and use the framework to solve a problem that is important to you. And then also, as part of our program, you also have to take 9 credits of geography courses from our Masters in GIS program. So, and we also, reminder, we have a MOOC, a massively open online course. This is a 5-week class that runs throughout the year. It gives you a great overview, includes case studies. You work at your own pace, but just a great way to kind of get a little more intro into what geodesign is. And our next offering will come at you in June. And so, what do you learn in our program? You learn the framework. We base our program off the Carl Steinitz framework. It's a process that's been vetted through 50 years of practice that Carl's done. But the idea is you kind of work through his framework. It's 3 iterations. The first iteration, you start and you scope the problem, or you do the why. Why are we doing this? Let's scope the problem. What is the problem? Let's identify it. What are the issues? Who is going to be affected by the change? The next one is the methods, and you figure out how you're going to do the study. What is going to be used to measure suitability or vulnerability. Who's going to make the decisions? And then the third iteration is the actual enacting of the framework. Let's run our models. Let's see what kind of feedback we're getting. Let's take it back to the stakeholders. Let's get their feedback throughout the process. And again, it's a powerful collaborative planning method. It's about working in teams, about using that GIS data to not just say, here's what the GIS data shows us, but let's help us make decisions. And I like this. This is another great Carl graphic that shows us it's important to have design professionals. You need the architect, you need the landscape architect, you need that design professional. And it's per problem, right? You don't always need an architect to solve issues. You don't always need a landscape architect. You need that design professional that's going to cater to that problem you're working on. You need the people, the place that have that institutional knowledge. You need the IT technologists to be able to manipulate the tools and the technology, and you need the scientists. So you really need those 4 groups of people are integral. And this top part shows it's about scale too. We're not really using geodesign at a site scale to solve issues in our backyard or even at a global scale. It really works best at that neighborhood to regional watershed scale is where geodesign works best. And then we have the tools, right? There's a myriad of tools as well. In our program, we teach you the framework. We give you access to the tools. We will provide guest lectures for people to kind of learn the tools, but goals of our courses aren't to teach you the tools. We do. I love this diagram by House Levine. Just shows you that there are a ton of tools that can be used to solve geodesign issues. But again, ours is about the process, not the tools. So just to get in a couple studio courses, as I mentioned, we do regional and urban studios. So I'll just briefly go over these. One we looked at was transit-oriented design in Florida. How Florida is going to grow. So how do we look to design, make decisions about design that look for that growth to be transit oriented? So we looked at existing conditions and future trends to come up with areas where this transit oriented design would be best suited. Another course we looked at was Paradise Valley near Yellowstone National Park, just north of Yellowstone. They have so Park County, Montana, they have a lack of zoning laws, a lot of influx of second homeowners who are looking to spend some money. And of course, they have pristine natural resources and wildlife that they want to protect. So how can they allow for low impact tourism? Essentially, that'll keep their economy going, but not affect those that biodiversity and those natural areas. So we looked at the stakeholders and then did some suitability modeling and again, presented some design ideas for how they might be able to grow in the coming years. If we switch to the urban context, we looked at potentially how Portland, Oregon could get the Olympics in 30 years. You know, in 30 years, they say Portland's going to grow by 300,000 people. If they wanted to plan for that with the idea of getting the Olympics in 2050 or 2054, then what would they need to do now to plan for that? So we gave students the task of determining where certain venues would go and then designing them. So we used Geodesign Hub to analyze the area and again look at the ideal sites for the venues. We looked at GeoPlanner to kind of do, once we determined those sites, we used GeoPlanner to dig in a little deeper, try to plan them out, figure out the best layouts for some of these sites, and then City Engine for representing the data. And then one of the most recent courses we did was looking at healthcare systems in Utica, New York. Utica is a Rust Belt town in central New York that is not doing very well economically. The population has decreased significantly in the past 20, 30 years, and they have a proposal to build a hospital. But if you notice in the upper left here, you can see the hospital in the middle, but all around it, you can see it's surrounded by surface parking. And so we looked at, you know, what are the existing conditions now, and then what is the new hospital? You can see there, adding 10 acres of surface parking, adding very little green infrastructure. So there, you can see that, you can imagine there's some issues there. And again, we took the City Engine to kind of, what are the final outputs and what are some different scenarios they could do maybe instead of the surface parking. So yeah, with that said, we want to thank you all for being here. Again, please find us on social media. We try to post a lot of different information out there about what we've been trying to do, about our program, about other folks who are using Geodesign. And so please follow along. And I see a lot of you have left your emails in the chat, so thank you. We will add you to our list. So we are recording this. We will send it out. And really want to thank you all for coming and throw it to some Q&As on the chat. So if you have anything, please feel free to throw it up there. I don't know, Lisa, if you had any final parting thoughts for us, please feel free to add them in. We will be recording. We will send this out to everybody. Just definitely leave your email there. No questions thus far. What is the current status of the Musser Gap project? Thank you. So yeah, the project that Lisa talked about, it is out for, it did go out to RFP and it did get awarded. So I'm not sure if that's public yet. I know because my neighbor was on the team actually. So but that information will be coming out soon. But the idea is that they are planning to implement the ideas that came about through the project. They are planning to implement those. So that's where it is. Talk a little bit about the difference between the certificate and the master's. The certificate is essentially the first part of our program. So you learn the software, you learn the framework. It's that first year. You learn the framework. It's 3 courses, and then you also take 5 credits from from the Masters in GIS program. So the idea with partnering with our geography program is that we want to allow, we want folks to come into the program with GIS experience. But if you don't have GIS experience, then the Master's in GIS program has some intro level courses that you can take to kind of get up to speed. If you do have GIS experience, there's 30 other courses that from a myriad of topics that you can choose from to kind of enhance your own geospatial knowledge to help you get through the program. And you can take those geography courses at any point. You can take them at the beginning, in the middle, the end. You can kind of spread them out. So you have kind of a bunch of different options there. For there's questions about the total credits. We're looking at, for the master's, it's 15 credits to 9 from geodesign and 6 from geography. And sorry, that is for the certificate. For the certificate program, it's 15 credits. For the master's program, it's 35 credits. And again, that's 9 from geography and 26 from the geodesign program. And so, yeah, you can get it done in as little as 3 years. We have had folks finish in as little as 3 years. Got another question about somebody who has a master's in GIS and developing his own technical ability, but how much emphasis on technology is in the program supporting the process. We kind of leave that to the students. Again, we teach parts of technology through the course. So 1 week we might have a module that says, all right, we're going to have a guest speaker that's going to teach you geodesign for this hour. We're going to go over, GeoPlanner maybe, or City Engine. We're going to go over the tools. You're going to work through some tutorials, and you're going to learn the tools so you can apply it. So we want you to get enough of those tools so you can kind of apply the thinking part that you're learning through the course. So we definitely encourage you to use the tools. We give you access to the full Esri stack of platform of tools. Of course, you're welcome to use, CAD or any kind of other tools that QGIS, any other kind of tools that you want to use, you can use. Okay, these are some good questions. I appreciate it. And I got a couple more coming in here. Are the studios all geodesign students? Or are there others? Other students involved, and they're entirely online. So in our studio courses, we do have it's all geodesign students. So you are working with geodesign students who have come through the process, the same process you have. And in the entirely online, yes. So the whole program is entirely online. The only thing that's not online is when you do your capstone project, you have to make either a presentation. You have to make a presentation at a major conference, which is up to you and your advisor to decide. It could be something local to you. It could be the Esri International Conference, a users conference, but it's something you and your advisor work on. And it could not just be a conference presentation, but it could also be a paper or a poster presentation. So there's options for doing that. And just so you know, we do have a lot of students that will just apply to the Penn State Graduate School as a non-degree student to take Geodesign 511, just to take one course. And then you can take up to 15 credits before you have to declare a program. So you can take Geodesign 511 as a one-off before you apply to the certificate program. And then when you apply to the certificate program, and if you're into the certificate program and you get your certificate, we have a streamlined process to get you into our master's program as well. So we use we use your previous geodesign coursework as well to help get you in. Oh. Okay. Then what is the typical makeup of students? Like I said, we are all, it's all mainly practicing professionals. We have some students who have gotten their undergrad and rolled right into the master's program, but in general, we have folks that are working. They cannot quit their job and go back to school, so that they would like to get an online course, and so the typical makeup is kind of the older working student. And I think, sorry, also in terms of where they come from the background, Some have had masters, some don't have masters. We've had landscape architects, we've had GIS professionals, we've had ecologists, we have had urban and city planners. We've had a really wide variety of students from different backgrounds and from all over around the world. You know, Australia, Hong Kong, Japan, South America, down in Belize. We have a student right now, and so we are both domestic and international. Okay, well, our participants are dropping off, and sounds like the questions are drying up. So I'll just take this time to say thank you to everybody. Thank you, Lisa, for your great insight and your practical wisdom. Appreciate that. Thank you for the questions and for those who left your emails, and we will share this when we're done. And again, please feel free to reach out to us with any questions, or if you need us to elaborate on any of this information, we'd love to hear from you. Happy Earth Day. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you.